And so they were found guilty of one of the most heinous stabbing attacks in the UK. But due to legal reasons, the identities of the two teenagers behind Brianna Ghey's murder remain protected.
I don't know how she did that.
Extraordinary dignity and compassion as well. That last bit about the murderers' families, the impact that's going to have on them is just remarkable. The judge in Brianna's trial will consider whether the report restrictions on their name should be lifted, putting a name to girl X and boy Y. Well, Kirsty Brimelow KC specialises in criminal law and joins us now. Good morning to you, Kirsty. Thank you for joining us. I mean, it was extraordinary watching Esther, Brianna's mum, talking there after the case, and you get a sense of what they have been through. And the details of the case are horrific, truly horrific, what happened to their beautiful young daughter. There was lots of our viewers this morning saying, if these teenagers committed this crime in the way that they did it, and they did it in the knowledge of what they were doing fully, they should be named. They've committed a crime of such heinous ferocity. There absolutely should be no protection for them. What is the judge weighing up right now?
Yes, I mean, this is the most serious crime, and there's a real horror undoubtedly felt by anybody who followed it, or anybody who even saw the headline of the conviction. So what the judge will weigh up is currently there's anonymity around any identification of those two defendants, and the judge is going to weigh up the welfare of the children, will weigh up their privacy, but also will weigh up the principle, which is usually the principle of open justice. So that means looking at the public interest, looking at the interests of justice, and carry out a balancing exercise on whether this is a case where the identity of those two children should be published. It would be rare. It's a discretion of the judge that there is an imposition of anonymity for children. So that's people who are under 18 years old. It happens automatically in the youth court, but it's discretionary in the Crown Court.
You have represented young people, haven't you, accused of various different, very serious...
Yes.
Have you been murder?
Yes, yes, I have, sadly. And I had one case a number of years ago now, representing a 15-year-old who was convicted of murder of a 15-year-old. And they are just terrible cases all round.
And in terms of that case, for example, was there any interest in lifting any anonymity there for your...
There wasn't an application in that case specifically from the press to lift the anonymity.
And this is from the press, so this request is from them. And I was looking back at some other cases where the anonymity has been lifted in those cases by the judge, and often the reason given is that there is a sort of deterrent aspect. That, say, for example, in knife crime, the increasing prevalence of knife crime among young people, for example, carrying a knife even as a crime, that the judge might have deemed that it was necessary and important for other young people to see these are the consequences.
Yes.
But there is something so separate in a way about this. It's so horrifically unique, isn't it?
Yes, I mean
what is the public interest if it's being argued?
I mean, one of the factors that a judge would take into consideration is exactly that. Is it a deterrent by actually naming the children? But as you say, they are children. And so
it's interesting you say that, sorry, Kirsty, because there'll be people watching today going, they were 15 when they committed the crime. They're 16-year-olds. A 16-year-old, I've got a 16-year-old, he certainly doesn't consider himself a child. I know in the eyes of the law, if you're under 18, it's that term and the nature of this crime. Was nothing childlike about the crime, was there?
Yes. There's nothing childlike about the act of the crime of murder, and that's the horror of it. But part of the horror is because they are still children. They're under 18, so they are still children. And the minds and the brains of somebody under 18 is different to an adult. It develops differently. I mean, we have all the science about that now. And I know in this case that the sentence has been adjourned to get more information and more psychological reports, expert reports upon these two children. So it's not actually that there is a way of looking at cases, but there's always so much complexity to it. But ultimately, obviously, anger, people wanting to know who they are, and the application by the press is entirely understandable. it's a balancing exercise that will be carried out by the judge.
There's an interesting message, sorry, Ranveer, that's coming from Alison on X, who says Brianna Ghey's killers should remain anonymous, not for their protection, but so that we remember Brianna and never give them the notoriety that they are after. There's an element of that as well, isn't there? We talked about this earlier, that actually there's a sort of a certain sense of notoriety that comes from something like this that can play into what it is that they're...
Yeah, I mean, that's a really interesting approach to have, because I think much more traditionally people have a perception of, I really need to know, why should they have the protection of anonymity? But there is the point as well of, in fact, why should their names be there as opposed to Brianna's name and her memory and her as a person? So that wouldn't be a consideration that the judge would have. The judge would consider the protection, the welfare of the children as well, because ultimately, with children and with sentencing of children, those under 18, rehabilitation also is meant to be at the core of that. Right. And if you publish a child's name, you are likely to be impacting upon their future and their rehabilitation. It will have an effect which is bound to be a negative effect upon that child. And so really partly you have to consider, you know, do we as a society still believe in some rehabilitation, or are we a society which is lock up, name and shame, throw away the key? And I would hope that as we've developed through our criminal justice system, we see the importance of rehabilitation.
Yeah, and of course Brianna's family know the identity of the killers, and the family, and the community will know.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a very interesting case. Thank you so much, and thank you much for coming in.
Thanks, Kirsty.
Thank you.